The cafeteria was loud that Tuesday afternoon. Kids were laughing, talking, sharing food, and making plans for after school. But in the far corner, away from all the noise and energy, sat a 12-year-old boy named Daniel. He was alone at his table as usual. His fingers moved in strange patterns on the plastic surface, tapping out rhythms that only he could hear in his head. Daniel wasn't like the other kids. Everyone could see that. While they wore the latest sneakers and trendy hoodies, Daniel wore clothes that were a size too big, handed down or bought from thrift stores. While they talked about video games and sports, Daniel spoke in a way that sounded too grown up, using words that made other kids look at him funny. He didn't follow what was cool. He didn't seem to care about fitting in, and that made him an easy target. Across the cafeteria, a group of popular kids sat at their usual table. Tyler was their leader, tall for his age with perfectly styled hair and expensive basketball shoes. He noticed Daniel's finger tapping and nudged his friends. They all turned to look and started laughing. Tyler stood up and began imitating Daniel's movements, making them even more exaggerated and silly. His friends howled with laughter. Other kids at nearby tables started watching too. Daniel saw them mocking him. His face turned red, but he didn't stop moving his fingers. He couldn't stop, really. The rhythms in his head were too strong, too persistent. They helped him deal with the world around him, helped him make sense of the chaos. But the other kids didn't understand that. They just saw someone weird, someone different, someone to laugh at. This wasn't new for Daniel. The teasing had started years ago, back in elementary school. But it had gotten worse since middle school began. Tyler and his group had made Daniel their favorite target. They would walk past him in the hallways and knock his books out of his hands. They would whisper loud enough for him to hear, saying things like weirdo and freak. During group projects, no one wanted to work with him. During gym class, he was always picked last, and lunchtime was the worst because there was nowhere to hide. Daniel finished his sandwich quickly and left the cafeteria. He couldn't take the stares and whispers anymore. His footsteps echoed in the empty hallway as he walked, not really knowing where to go. He just needed to be somewhere quiet, somewhere away from all those eyes. His feet carried him past the gym, past the science labs, until he found himself standing in front of a door he'd walked by hundreds of times but never entered. The music room. The door was slightly open. Daniel peeked inside. The room was empty and dim, with afternoon sunlight filtering through dusty windows. There were some chairs stacked in the corner, music stands leaning against the wall, and in the center of the room, covered with a faded cloth, was an old piano. Daniel had never played an instrument before. His mom couldn't afford music lessons, but something about the quiet room felt safe, like a shelter from the storm outside. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. The silence was beautiful. No laughter, no whispers, no judgmental stares. Just peace. Daniel walked slowly toward the piano, drawn to it for reasons he couldn't explain. He pulled the cloth back, revealing yellowed keys and scratched wood. The instrument looked as forgotten as he felt. Daniel glanced at the door, making sure no one was coming, then sat down on the worn bench. He stared at the keys for a long moment, his heart beating fast. Then, very carefully, he reached out and pressed one key. A single note rang out, clear and pure. The sound seemed to fill the entire room, vibrating in his chest, resonating in a way that words never could. Daniel pressed another key, then another. Each sound was like a small miracle. He had no idea what he was doing. He didn't know the names of the notes or how to read music. But his fingers, the same fingers that were always tapping out rhythms, seemed to know where to go. He began playing simple patterns, nothing fancy, just experimenting with how the sounds fit together. And for the first time in as long as he could remember, Daniel smiled. A real, genuine smile. When the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch, Daniel jumped up from the bench. He quickly covered the piano again and hurried to his next class. But his mind stayed in that music room. All through math and history, he kept thinking about those keys, those sounds, that feeling of discovering something that was meant just for him. At home that evening, things weren't much easier. Daniel lived with his mother, Lisa, in a small apartment on the third floor of an old building. Lisa worked as a nurse at the county hospital, pulling double shifts whenever she could to pay the rent and keep food on the table. She was exhausted most days, coming home late with sore feet and worry lines on her face. Daniel was doing his homework at the kitchen table when his mom came home. She dropped her bag by the door and kissed the top of his head.
"How was school, honey?"
she asked, though she asked this every day in the same tired voice. It was okay, Daniel replied. He never told her about the bullying. She had enough to worry about already. He could see it in her eyes, the constant stress of making ends meet, of raising a kid alone, of wondering if she was doing enough. Lisa heated up leftover pasta, and they ate dinner together quietly. She asked about his classes, his homework, if he'd made any friends. That last question stung. Daniel just shrugged and said he was fine. But Lisa saw through it. She'd been seeing through it for months now. She noticed how Daniel never got invited to birthday parties, how his phone never rang with calls from classmates, how he spent every weekend alone in his room. Daniel, she said gently, I know middle school is hard, but maybe you could try to fit in a little more, join a sports team or something. Make some friends? Daniel looked down at his plate. His mom meant well, but she didn't understand. He'd tried fitting in. It never worked. He wasn't made for fitting in. I'm okay, Mom, really. Lisa sighed but didn't push it. She was too tired to push it. After dinner, Daniel went to his small bedroom and lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling. His mind drifted back to the music room, to that piano, to those beautiful sounds. Something had awakened inside him today. Something that had been sleeping his whole life. He didn't have words for it yet, but he knew one thing for certain. He had to go back to that piano. He had to hear those sounds again. The next day at school, Daniel could barely focus on his classes. He kept watching the clock, counting down the minutes until lunch. Tyler and his friends threw balled-up paper at him during English class, and the teacher didn't notice. Kids laughed at him in the hallway. It was just another normal day of being invisible and ridiculed at the same time. But when lunch finally came, Daniel didn't go to the cafeteria. He went straight to the music room. His heart pounded as he opened the door, afraid someone might be inside. But the room was empty again, waiting for him. Daniel sat at the piano, pulled back the cloth, and began to play. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the bullies, not the loneliness, not the worry about money or fitting in. There was only the music, and for the first time in his life, Daniel felt like he belonged somewhere. Daniel's secret visits to the music room became the highlight of his days. Every lunch period, he would slip away from the crowded cafeteria and make his way down the empty hallway to that quiet sanctuary. The piano was waiting for him, and each time he sat down, something magical happened. His fingers seemed to remember where they'd been the day before, and they wanted to go further to explore more. At first, Daniel just played random notes, listening to how they sounded together. Some combinations were harsh and clashed against each other. Others were beautiful, like they were meant to be played together. He started to notice patterns, to understand that certain notes felt like they belonged in families. He didn't know he was teaching himself music theory. He just knew that some things sounded right and some things didn't. Within a week, Daniel could play simple melodies he'd heard on the radio. He would hear a song on the way to school, and by lunchtime his fingers would be working out how to recreate it on the piano. It wasn't perfect, but it was recognizable, and every day he got a little bit better. His fingers moved faster. The melodies became clearer. The music started to sound less like random notes and more like actual songs. But Daniel was careful, very careful. He always made sure to close the door most of the way, leaving it just slightly open so it wouldn't look suspicious if anyone walked by. He kept the volume as soft as possible, pressing the keys gently so the sound wouldn't travel down the hallway, and he always kept one eye on the clock, making sure to leave a few minutes before the lunch period ended, so no one would see him coming out of the music room. For 3 weeks, his secret was safe. Daniel lived in 2 different worlds. There was the regular world where kids ignored him or mocked him, where Tyler and his friends made every day miserable, where he felt invisible and unwanted. And then there was the music room world, where he felt alive, where his hands could speak the language his mouth never could, where he wasn't weird or different. He was just himself, and that was enough. Then one afternoon, everything changed. Daniel was playing during lunch, lost in a melody he'd been working on for days. He had his eyes closed, feeling the music more than thinking about it. He didn't hear the door creak open a little wider. He didn't hear the footsteps on the old wooden floor. He didn't notice anything until a deep voice spoke from behind him. "You're pretty good, kid." Daniel's hands froze on the keys. His heart jumped into his throat. Slowly, he turned around. expecting to see a teacher who would tell him he wasn't allowed to be there, that he'd be in trouble for using school property without permission. But instead he saw Mr. Patterson, the school janitor. Mr. Patterson was an older man, probably in his 60s, with gray hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. He wore his usual navy blue uniform and carried a mop, having apparently been cleaning the hallway when he heard the piano. Daniel's face went pale. He started to stammer an apology, already standing up from the bench. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I'll leave. I won't come back, I promise." Mr. Patterson held up his hand, and a small smile played at his lips. "Hold on now. I didn't say you had to leave. I asked how long you've been playing." Daniel blinked, confused. About 3 weeks?" The janitor's eyebrows went up. 3 weeks? And you're playing like that? Who's your teacher?" "I don't have a teacher," Daniel admitted quietly. "I'm just figuring it out myself." Mr. Patterson walked closer to the piano, his footsteps slow and thoughtful. He looked at the instrument with an expression Daniel couldn't quite read. It was something like nostalgia, mixed with sadness and maybe a bit of joy. "You know," the old man said, "I used to play, long time ago, jazz mostly. Played in clubs all over the city when I was younger." Daniel's eyes widened. He'd never imagined Mr. Patterson as anything other than the janitor who mopped the floors and emptied the trash cans. "Really, why did you stop?" Mr. Patterson shrugged. "Life gets in the way sometimes. Jobs, family, bills to pay. Music doesn't always pay those bills, especially when you're not quite good enough to make it big." He touched the piano lid gently, like greeting an old friend. "But I never forgot how it felt. That feeling when you hit the right notes and everything just clicks." "That's exactly it," Daniel said, his voice excited for the first time in the conversation. "It's like the piano is saying what I can't say with words." The janitor nodded slowly. "You've got a gift, son. Natural ear, good instincts, but you're gonna hit a wall soon if you don't learn the fundamentals. How to read music, understand chord progressions, proper technique." Daniel's excitement deflated. "I can't afford lessons. My mom works all the time just to pay rent." "I know," Mr. Patterson said. Then he was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Tell you what, I'm in this building every day and that piano's just sitting here collecting dust anyway. You keep practicing during your lunch. I'll make sure nobody bothers you, and maybe I'll leave some things lying around. Old music books, sheet music, stuff that might be helpful for someone trying to teach themselves." Daniel couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Really, you do that?" "Consider it my way of keeping music alive in this place," Mr. Patterson said. "But you've got to promise me something. You practice every day. Don't waste this gift you've got." From that day forward, everything changed. Daniel still came to the music room every lunch period, but now he wasn't just playing by ear. Books started appearing on top of the piano. Introduction to Music Theory, Basic Piano Technique, Classical Compositions for Beginners. Daniel would arrive to find a new book waiting for him, and he devoured each one like it was the most interesting story he'd ever read. He learned about scales and keys. He discovered that the patterns he'd been noticing had names like major and minor, chord progressions and intervals. He practiced exercises that strengthened his fingers and improved his control. The music he created became more complex, more intentional. He wasn't just copying songs anymore. He was understanding them, and then he was changing them, making them his own. Mr. Patterson would sometimes stop by during Daniel's practice sessions. He never stayed long, usually just passing through with his cleaning cart. But he'd pause, listen for a minute, and offer a tip. "Try using your left hand to create a bass line there." Or, "That's good, but watch your posture. Sit up straight or your back will hurt after a while." Small things that made a big difference. 2 months passed. Daniel's skill grew at a rate that seemed almost impossible. When he played now, it didn't sound like a beginner stumbling through notes. It sounded like music, real music. He could play complex classical pieces after reading through them just a few times. He started composing his own melodies during class, writing them down on spare paper when he should have been taking notes. The piano had become more than just an escape. It was his voice, his identity, his purpose. When Daniel played, he wasn't the weird kid that everyone made fun of. He wasn't the poor kid with second-hand clothes. He wasn't alone or invisible. He was a musician, and the music he created was proof that he mattered, that he had something valuable to offer the world. But his two worlds were still completely separate. At the piano, he was confident and skilled. In the hallways, the cafeteria, the classrooms, He was still the same target for Tyler and his friends. The bullying hadn't stopped. If anything, it had gotten worse because Daniel seemed even more distracted now, even more lost in his own world. Tyler had noticed that Daniel disappeared every lunch period. One day, curious about where the weird kid was going, Tyler decided to follow him. He stayed far back watching as Daniel slipped into the music room. Tyler crept closer, peeking through the gap in the door. And there was Daniel, sitting at that old piano playing music that Tyler didn't expect. Tyler pulled out his phone and started recording. This was gold. Proof that Daniel was even weirder than everyone thought. He recorded for about 30 seconds, then quietly backed away, a mean smile spreading across his face. He couldn't wait to show his friends. They were going to make Daniel's life even more miserable, and Tyler was going to enjoy every second of it. Daniel kept playing, completely unaware that his secret had just been discovered. He finished his piece and smiled, feeling proud of how much he'd improved. In just a few more minutes, the lunch bell would ring, and he'd have to return to the other world. But for now, he was exactly where he belonged. The next morning, Daniel knew something was wrong the moment he walked into school. Kids were staring at him more than usual, and not just staring. They were whispering, pointing, and some were holding back laughs. His stomach twisted with a familiar dread, but this felt different. This felt worse. By the time he reached his locker, he understood why. Tyler and his friends were gathered nearby, and Tyler was holding up his phone, showing something to a growing crowd of students. Daniel caught a glimpse of the screen as he walked past, and his heart sank. It was him. Playing the piano, Tyler had recorded him. "Check this out," Tyler was saying loudly, making sure Daniel could hear. "While normal people are eating lunch and hanging out with friends, this weirdo is in the music room playing piano like some kind of freak." "Who does that?" The kids around Tyler laughed. Some of them had already seen the video. Tyler had posted it on social media the night before with a caption that made fun of Daniel for hiding away to play an old piano. The comments were cruel. People Daniel had never even talked to were making jokes about him. Daniel felt his face burning. He quickly opened his locker, grabbed his books, and tried to disappear into the crowd. But the damage was done. Now everyone knew about his secret place, his one safe spot in the entire school. The music room didn't feel safe anymore. It felt exposed, like someone had ripped away the only protection he had. During first period, Daniel couldn't focus. He kept thinking about that video, about all those people watching him, laughing at him. The one thing that was his, that belonged to him alone, had been turned into a joke. He felt angry and embarrassed and violated all at once. When the lunch bell rang, Daniel didn't go to the music room. He couldn't. Instead, he sat outside on a bench far from the main buildings, eating his sandwich alone and feeling more isolated than ever. The weeks that followed were harder than before. Tyler's group had new ammunition now, and they used it constantly. They would make exaggerated piano-playing gestures whenever Daniel walked by. They'd hum off key melodies and then laugh. In gym class, someone started calling him Mozart in a mocking tone, and the nickname spread. Even kids who'd never bothered Daniel before felt free to join in the teasing. Daniel stopped going to the music room entirely. He couldn't bear the thought of Tyler or anyone else recording him again. The piano, which had been his source of joy and escape, now felt like the source of his humiliation. He went back to eating lunch in the cafeteria's far corner, his fingers tapping rhythms on the table just like before. Except now it was worse because he knew what he was missing. Mr. Patterson noticed Daniel's absence. One afternoon, as Daniel was leaving school, the janitor caught up with him in the parking lot. "Haven't seen you in the music room lately," Mr. Patterson said, his voice gentle but concerned. Daniel kept walking, not wanting to talk about it. "I'm done with that. Because of those boys? Because they made fun of you?" "Because everyone thinks I'm a freak," Daniel said, his voice cracking slightly. "They recorded me and made me into a joke. I can't go back there." Mr. Patterson was quiet for a moment. Then he said something Daniel didn't expect. "You know what the difference is between someone with talent and someone who wastes it? It's not skill. It's courage. Talent is easy. Courage is hard." Daniel stopped walking and turned to face the old man. "You don't understand. You didn't have to see what they wrote about me. You didn't have to hear them all laughing. You're right. I don't know exactly what you're going through," Mr. Patterson admitted, "but I do know that you've got something special. And if you let those boys take that away from you, they win. Not just the fight, they win everything. They take your gift, your joy, your future. Is that what you want? Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't, because part of him wanted to just give up, to stop trying, to stop being the target. But another part of him, a deeper part, knew that the piano was more than just a hobby. It was who he was. A few days later, the principal's voice came over the loudspeaker during morning announcements. Attention students. Our annual spring talent show will be held in 4 weeks. Sign-up sheets are posted outside the main office. This is open to all students, and we encourage everyone to showcase their unique abilities. Parents and families are invited to attend. The cafeteria buzzed with excitement. The talent show was one of the biggest events of the year. Tyler and his friends were already talking about their act. They'd planned an elaborate dance routine to a popular song, complete with matching outfits they'd been practicing for weeks. They were confident they'd win. They always did. Daniel listened to all the chatter and felt nothing. He wasn't going to sign up. Why would he? So more people could laugh at him? So Tyler could have an even bigger audience to humiliate him in front of? No way. He was done putting himself out there. That evening at home, Daniel was doing homework at the kitchen table when his mom came home from work. She looked more tired than usual, her shoulders sagging under the weight of another double shift. She dropped her bag, kicked off her shoes, and sat down heavily in the chair across from him. Long day? Daniel asked. They're all long days, Lisa said with a weak smile. Then she noticed something in Daniel's expression, something sad and defeated that she'd been seeing more and more lately. Baby, are you okay? And don't just say you're fine. I can see something's wrong. Daniel wanted to lie to protect her from worrying more than she already did. But he was so tired of holding everything in. So he told her. Not everything, but enough. He told her about the piano, about teaching himself to play, about how good it made him feel. And then he told her about Tyler's video, about the teasing, about how his one escape had been turned into a weapon against him. Lisa listened quietly, and when Daniel finished, there were tears in her eyes. Why didn't you tell me you were learning piano? That's amazing, sweetheart. Because we can't afford lessons. Because I didn't want you to feel bad that you couldn't give me that. His mom reached across the table and took his hand. Daniel, I know I work a lot. I know I can't give you everything other kids have. But I never wanted my struggles to make you hide who you are. If playing piano makes you happy, then that's what matters. It did make me happy, Daniel said quietly. But now it just reminds me that I don't fit in. Lisa squeezed his hand tighter. Good, you shouldn't fit in. Fitting in is overrated. Standing out is better. Later that night, Daniel lay in bed, unable to sleep. His mom's words kept echoing in his head. Standing out is better. But standing out hurt. Standing out meant being alone, being mocked, being different in a world that punished difference. He thought about the piano sitting silent in that music room. He thought about Mr. Patterson's words about courage. He thought about all the melodies still trapped inside him. Songs he'd been composing in his head but couldn't play because he'd given up. Around midnight, Daniel got out of bed and went to his small desk. He pulled out a piece of paper and started writing. It wasn't homework. It was music, notes and measures, a composition he'd been working on in his mind for weeks, a piece that told his story without words, a piece about feeling invisible, about finding something that makes you visible, about fear and courage and deciding who you want to be. The next morning, Daniel walked into school with the paper folded in his pocket. He went straight to the main office. The talent show sign-up sheet was hanging on the bulletin board, already half filled with names. Tyler's name was near the top, written in bold letters. Daniel stood there for a long moment, his hand shaking as he held the pen. Everything in him screamed to walk away, to stay safe, to stay invisible. But then he thought about his mom working double shifts, sacrificing everything for him. He thought about Mr. Patterson leaving those books, believing in him when no one else did. He thought about the music trapped inside him, desperate to be heard. Daniel wrote his name on the list. His handwriting was small and shaky, but it was there, real and permanent. The moment he finished writing, his heart started racing. What had he just done? He'd just volunteered to humiliate himself in front of the entire school, in front of parents and teachers and everyone who already thought he was weird. He turned to leave and almost ran directly into Tyler. The bigger boy had seen him sign up. and was reading the list with an expression of disbelief that quickly turned into a cruel smile. "No way," Tyler said, loud enough that kids in the hallway turned to look. "The piano freak is actually going to perform? This is going to be hilarious." Daniel's face burned, but he didn't run. He stood there, met Tyler's eyes, and said nothing. Then he walked away with his head up, even though his whole body was trembling. He'd made his choice. In 4 weeks, he would either prove that he was more than what they thought, or he would confirm every cruel thing they'd ever said about him. There was no going back now. The 4 weeks that followed were the longest of Daniel's life. Word spread quickly that he'd signed up for the talent show, and it became the running joke of the entire school. Kids he'd never even spoken to would see him in the hallway and make comments. "Can't wait to see your performance," they'd say with smirks on their faces. Everyone expected him to embarrass himself, and they were excited to watch it happen. Tyler and his friends took it to another level. They created a countdown on social media. 3 weeks until the piano freak makes a fool of himself. Then 2 weeks. Then 1 week. Each post got dozens of comments from students making predictions about how badly Daniel would mess up. Some said he'd probably freeze on stage. Others joked that he'd run away crying. A few even started a poll asking whether he'd actually show up at all. Daniel saw all of it. Every post, every comment, every cruel prediction. And with each one, the voice in his head got louder, telling him to quit, to withdraw his name, to avoid the humiliation that was coming. But every time he thought about backing out, he remembered writing his name on that sign-up sheet. He remembered the feeling of finally choosing to be brave instead of safe. Still, knowing he should be brave and actually feeling brave were two very different things. Daniel returned to the music room to practice, but now it felt different. Before, he played for himself, for the pure joy of it. Now he was playing for an audience, for judgment, for stakes that felt impossibly high. His hands, which had always moved so naturally across the keys, felt stiff and clumsy. Notes he could usually play without thinking suddenly seemed complicated and difficult. Mr. Patterson noticed the change immediately. One afternoon, he came into the music room during Daniel's practice session and sat down on one of the folding chairs. Daniel stopped playing, expecting advice or encouragement. Instead, the old man just asked a simple question. "Why'd you sign up?" Daniel thought about it for a moment. "I don't know. Maybe to prove I'm not what they think I am." Mr. Patterson shook his head slowly. "Wrong answer. If you're playing to prove something to them, you've already lost. You'll be so worried about what they think that you won't be able to play at all." "Then why should I do it?" Daniel asked, frustration creeping into his voice. "Because the music deserves to be heard. Not for them. For itself. For you." Mr. Patterson stood up and walked to the door, then paused. "When I used to perform in clubs, you know what the best nights were? Not the nights when the crowd was big or when I was trying to impress someone. The best nights were when I forgot the audience existed and just played. That's when the real magic happened." After Mr. Patterson left, Daniel sat at the piano thinking about those words. He closed his eyes and started playing T. Piece he'd composed, the one that told his story, and for just a few minutes he forgot about the talent show. Forgot about Tyler and the countdown and the expectations. He just played, and it sounded beautiful. But that feeling never lasted long. Outside the music room, the pressure kept building. In the cafeteria, Tyler's group practiced their dance routine, making sure everyone saw how polished and professional they looked. They had matching outfits, synchronized moves, and the kind of confidence that comes from always winning. Watching them, Daniel felt his stomach twist with anxiety. How could he compete with that? The night before the talent show, Daniel couldn't eat dinner. His mom noticed him pushing food around his plate and sat down across from him with a serious expression. "You don't have to do this, you know," Lisa said gently. "If it's too much, no one would blame you for backing out." Daniel looked up at her, surprised. "I thought you wanted me to do it. I want you to be happy. And if this is making you miserable, then it's not worth it." She reached across the table and took his hand. "But if you're scared, that's different. Being scared is normal. Being scared means you're doing something that matters." That night, Daniel barely slept. He ran through his piece over and over in his mind, his fingers moving slightly under the covers as if he were actually playing. He imagined walking onto that stage, sitting at the piano, looking out at all those faces. The thought made his heart race and his palms sweat. What if he forgot the notes? What if his hands froze? What if everyone laughed? Morning came too quickly. Daniel got ready for school in a daze, putting on the nicest clothes he owned, which still weren't very nice. His mom had ironed his shirt and tried to make him look as presentable as possible, but he still felt shabby compared to how other kids would look. She drove him to school early, hugged him tightly in the parking lot, and whispered, "I'm proud of you no matter what happens." The whole school felt different that day. The talent show was all anyone could talk about. Classes were shorter to allow time for the evening performance, and by afternoon, students were decorating the auditorium and setting up equipment. Daniel walked past the auditorium doors several times, each time feeling his anxiety spike higher. At 3 o'clock, participants were called for a technical rehearsal. Daniel walked into the auditorium and stopped short. It was huge. Rows and rows of seats faced a proper stage with professional lighting and a sound system. In the center of the stage sat a beautiful grand piano, not the old beaten-up one from the music room. This instrument was glossy black and perfect, and somehow that made everything more intimidating. Tyler and his group were on stage practicing their routine. Music blasting, their movements sharp and impressive. Teachers and parents were already starting to arrive, claiming good seats. Daniel felt like he might throw up. He turned to leave, to run, to go anywhere but here. Daniel Chen. A teacher with a clipboard called his name. "You're up next for sound check." This was it. The moment of no return. Daniel's legs felt like concrete as he walked down the aisle toward the stage. Each step seemed to take forever. He climbed the stairs and crossed to the piano, aware that people were watching him. Tyler and his friends had stopped to watch too, whispering among themselves and laughing. Daniel sat at the bench. His hands were shaking so badly he had to clasp them together. He looked out at the empty seats that would soon be filled with hundreds of people. His vision started to blur. His breathing got fast and shallow. This was a mistake. A terrible, horrible mistake. "Whenever you're ready," the sound technician said from somewhere in the darkness. Daniel put his hands on the keys. They were cold and smooth under his fingers. He tried to start his piece, but his mind went completely blank. He couldn't remember the first note, couldn't remember any of it. The music that had been so clear in his head for weeks was just gone, erased by pure panic. He sat there frozen, his hands hovering uselessly over the keys. 30 seconds passed, a minute. Someone in Tyler's group laughed. The sound echoed through the auditorium like a gunshot. That laugh broke something in Daniel. He stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over the bench, and walked off stage. He didn't stop walking until he was outside the building, around the corner, hidden from view. He leaned against the brick wall and tried to catch his breath. His chest hurt. His eyes stung with tears he refused to let fall. He'd made it this far only to completely fall apart. Mr. Patterson was wrong. His mom was wrong. He wasn't brave. He was just a scared kid who'd been stupid enough to think he could be something more. "There you are." Mr. Patterson's voice came from nearby. The janitor walked over slowly, not rushing, just present. He didn't ask if Daniel was okay. The answer was obvious. "I can't do it," Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I got up there and I just froze. Everyone's going to see me fail." "Probably," Mr. Patterson agreed, and Daniel looked at him in shock. "Oh yeah, you'll probably mess up. Hit some wrong notes. Maybe forget a section. That's what happens when you perform. It's never perfect. Then why should I even try?" The old man was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You remember I told you I played jazz in clubs? I never told you about my last performance. I was 50 years old, playing a small venue, maybe 20 people in the audience. Middle of my solo, my mind went blank, just like what happened to you in there. I sat there for what felt like forever, completely lost. What did you do? I had two choices. I could walk off stage and let that be how I went out. Or I could play something, anything, even if it wasn't perfect. So I just put my fingers on the keys and played what came out. It wasn't what I'd planned. It was messy and improvised and probably not very good. But it was real. And when I finished, those 20 people clapped. Not because I was perfect, but because I didn't quit." Mr. Patterson put his hand on Daniel's shoulder. "The music isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest. About sharing what's inside you even when you're terrified. Especially when you're terrified. That's what makes it matter." Inside the building, Daniel could hear the muffled sounds of the auditorium filling up. The show would start in 30 minutes. His name was on the program. People were expecting him to perform, or more accurately, expecting him to fail. He thought about his mom driving here after her shift, tired but coming to support him. He thought about Mr. Patterson believing in him when no one else did. He thought about that moment in the music room when he first touched the piano and felt like he'd found a part of himself he didn't know was missing. Daniel pushed off from the wall. His hands were still shaking. His heart was still racing, but he started walking back toward the auditorium. Not because he wasn't scared anymore. He was absolutely terrified, but maybe that was the point. Maybe courage wasn't about not being afraid. Maybe it was about being afraid and doing it anyway. The auditorium was packed. Every seat was filled with students, parents, teachers, and family members. The lights dimmed and the principal walked onto the stage to welcome everyone. Daniel sat backstage with the other performers, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He was scheduled to perform fifth right after Tyler's group. The first few acts went by in a blur. A girl sang a pop song. 2 boys did a comedy sketch that got decent laughs. A group of dancers performed to loud cheers. Daniel barely registered any of it. He kept looking at his hands, willing them to stop shaking, trying to remember the first notes of his piece. They came to him, then slipped away, then came back again. Then Tyler's group was called to the stage. The music started loud and energetic, and they launched into their routine. They were good. Really good. Their movements were perfectly synchronized, their energy was infectious, and the crowd loved it. Students were clapping along, parents were smiling, and when they finished with a dramatic pose, the auditorium erupted in applause and cheers. Tyler and his friends walked off stage grinning, high-fiving each other, absolutely confident they'd just won. As they passed Daniel in the wings, Tyler looked right at him and smirked. "Good luck following that piano freak," he whispered, just loud enough for Daniel to hear. Then the principal's voice came through the speakers. "Next up, we have Daniel Chen performing an original piano composition." This was it. No more time to prepare, no more chances to back out. Daniel stood up on legs that didn't feel quite solid. He walked toward the stage opening, and with each step, the noise of the crowd seemed to get louder. He could hear individual voices, whispers, someone laughing. He reached the edge of the stage and stopped. The spotlight was blindingly bright. Beyond it, he could see the dark mass of the audience, hundreds of faces he couldn't quite make out. The piano sat in the center of the stage, waiting. Daniel forced his feet to move. One step, another. The walk to that piano felt like the longest journey of his life. Students in the front rows were already pulling out their phones, ready to record what they expected to be an embarrassing failure. Daniel sat down on the bench. He adjusted it slightly, buying himself a few more seconds. His hands hovered over the keys, trembling. The auditorium had gone quiet, but it wasn't a respectful quiet. It was the quiet of an audience waiting for something to go wrong, eager to see the weird kid crash and burn. He placed his fingers on the keys. They felt different from the old piano in the